How's it going? Welcome to the YouTube channel. I'm Chris Kiefer. Thanks for joining me, and I appreciate you guys downloading this video and watching it. So today we're going to do a little bit about the Orange Brigade 2025 KTM 450. As usual, I'll try to be 100% transparent here, so let's just start off from the top from that. Like, since 2018, KTM hasn't been the most comfortable bike to ride on rough tracks. Look, I'll say this. The engine on the KTM 450 is probably one of the friendliest 450s out there. We said the KX 450 is friendly as well, but this has a blend of power and linear feel that the KX doesn't have. The KX just feels kind of slow and heavy down low. The KTM has response, but yet keeps that linear feel. So for me, KTM has done a great job with the engine. But today we're going to talk about the modifications we have done to our bike, because I feel like almost all of these are important for this machine. Now, we'll say this, if you guys are wondering, hey man, I don't have any money for all this stuff, no problem, I get it. Air fork for me has come a long way, but still doesn't quite have the comfort consistency that a spring fork has. And if you guys are wondering what the hell comfort consistency is, it's like you might have a good setting on your air fork, and that might change 2 to 3 hours later if you're still at the track. So it just never feels consistent throughout the day. A spring fork, if you have a decent setting, usually throughout that whole day you're at the track, that keeps that consistency. So for me, I'm going to start with the chassis things that I have done on this bike to help get me more comfort. I brought my handy dandy list here, the things to talk about. So let's just bust right into it. What would you guys need to do first for your chassis to be more comfortable? Look, it sucks to say, a spring fork conversion is probably the easiest way to get more front end traction, more front end feel out of this bike. You guys asked me, which one should I use? Look, I've tried almost all of them. I try to shy away from the single-sided spring fork conversions. There are many out there. You guys are really hit me up a lot about the Blackjack cartridge kit. I've tried that. That is also good. So what I wanted to do, because we all know Chase Sexton went to a KYB fork internally on his KTM. So what we did with REP, we went to Technical Touch, because they sell a KYB conversion kit for your KTM. We installed that inside of these WP outers, and right away, just from that conversion, also valved for my weight, way more front end traction, a lot more consistency, and just better hand feel through the bar. So when we talk about bump touch, slap down landings, the air fork isn't that great in that circumstance. Neither is this 2024 and 2025 chassis, even though KTM did change the chassis a little bit in 2025, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But for me, dropping KYB internals, no matter what you do, you're just getting immediate comfort. Look, you're going to spend $1,500 to $1,800 just to get a spring fork, and I know you guys in the comments are going to bark at me. Why buy a $10,000 motorcycle when you got to put another $2 grand into a suspension? I understand it. This is my headache as well with KTM. Look, I always say, if I had $1 for every time I say, if you put a spring fork on a KTM, it would win a shootout, I'd probably have 150 bucks, because I say it all the time. But it's really true. Once you get a more comfortable fork on this KTM, it changes the whole dynamic of the chassis. So for me, this is what we did. Technical Touch sells the KYB kit. You can go to your local dealer. You don't have to go to REP. Just someone that is reputable and knows about KYB suspension. So we put that in, and right away we noticed more front end traction, better lean angle, the bike corners better, I get more stability. So right away, just putting a KYB conversion on versus other conversions. I speak highly of the WP 6500 drop-in kit, which is similar to a KYB internal system. With the 6500 WP conversion, it gets rid of the cone valve. It uses a mid-valve system, which I think this fork slash bike needs. And of course, KYB is probably the leader in suspension comfort from everyone. WP, Showa, whatever it is, always when I'm on a KYB fork suspension, I get the most comfort. The action of a KYB moves more than a Showa or a WP A kit or an AER fork. It moves more in the stroke, it follows the ground better, aka more front end traction. So that's one thing that we did. We did keep, we can zoom in here, we did keep a WP track shock system. I never really have that much complaints with either the stock shock or just the rear track system from WP. So we kept the WP internals inside there. We have a setting for me. You guys don't need to go to an A-kit shock. It's just something we've been testing. So valving your current WP shock will suffice, but in stock form it is pretty soft, empty on the end stroke. So for me, I like to valve it and spring up on the KTM 450. We can zoom down to the linkage, Aiden. We can talk about that. REP makes a linkage system, and what that does is, if you guys are familiar with, you know, 23 to 25 KTM 450s, I will say that on decel it moves side to side. So when you're coming into a corner, I always have a problem with the bike kicking side to side. What this linkage does, it helps the rising rate, brings the rear end up, and prevents that from happening. It just gives a better overall, better ride attitude off throttle. I don't notice a huge difference on acceleration, besides the bike is up a little bit more. It helps anti-squat, which in theory KTM tried to do with the counter shaft sprocket and how they tilted the engine, but still every time I get on a KTM, it always feels ass in low. So with that linkage, it helps bring that feeling up on acceleration and prevents that kick from side to side, which to me predicts my corner. We can say, hey, yeah, the bike feels light and it corners great, but if you can't get into the corner from the previous corner, you know, from point A to point B, what's the point? So that linkage, along with a valved, heavier sprung shock, really helps this bike. So right away, just that alone, nothing else here, helps the chassis feel of your motorcycle. Look, fork, help and comfort, maybe not helping stability or chassis stiffness yet, we'll get to that, but right away you will get more front end feel and more comfort just from what we're doing. And of course, helping that rear end stay up will help your stability leading into the corner. Now, the Rage triple clamps, split triple clamps, like everyone's saying, hey, split triple clamp, it's gonna help flex, it's gonna do this, but that doesn't necessarily mean they are going to a softer feel just because they are in a split design. Now, KTM sells these clamps, which I feel like do a great job. There's many triple clamps to choose from out there. We chose this because we had them through KTM, and they do provide a little bit more feeling as far as slap down comfort through my hands versus the stock KTM clamp, which is a neck-in clamp. Neck-in makes that clamp. So a few choices out there. Just because we have these on there doesn't mean this is all I ran. Ride Engineering has a 23.5 millimeter offset, which really helps the stability and I would say straight line traction. This is still a 22 millimeter offset. I feel like I'm okay with that offset. I just need a little bit more feeling through my hands, thus having this design. There are other designs out there to help stiffness in other directions. Some are a little bit stiffer to help comfort, aka how Honda ended up stiffening their chassis design in 2025. That is still the case with this design. Certain parts of this chassis need to be stiffened up and certain parts need to be softened up. So this design clamp does help the feeling through my hands. You don't necessarily need to go to a different offset, but it does help if you feel like your KTM is a little bit twitchy. All right, simple things to help comfort. Going to a different handlebar. The stock handlebar on the KTM is stiff-natured. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm okay with the bend. We have gone with a Renthal 672 bend, or you guys can go to a Pro Taper Husqvarna stock bend. I cut my bars to 800 to 803 millimeters. If you are a Pro Taper guy, they come stock at 800. If you are a Renthal guy, which we are here, we have to cut these things. So cutting them is important. People say, you are crazy, Kiefer. What are you smoking? It's 10 millimeters. You're not going to feel it. Well, you know what? You do feel it. And people think, hey, wouldn't you want a wider bar to get more leverage to corner better? No. Why? Because when you shorten your bars to a certain extent, it does actually help you lean. Picture a rope, right? You have a rope there's no knot in it. okay? And then you cut your, or you don't cut your bars, right? And you go to lean, I feel like you have that easy tipping point with a 811, 800 to 13 millimeter bar. Easy to leverage initially, but then you have like a knot in your corner. I always feel that when I have wide bars. It's hard to get past that middle portion of the lean with a longer bar. You cut your bar, 800 to 803, that knot frees up. It may be a little bit tougher initially, but man, it falls down way easier than a wider bar. So that's important to me. Maybe you don't give a shit, but I do. 800 to 803 is where we're at here. Not a huge fan of lock-on grips. We use a ZRT throttle, which is, my kid behind the camera here just felt that, and he's like, holy crap, man, that thing is really easy to use. Yes, I hate plastic. Anything plastic, for one. It just makes it really grainy, feels old. It doesn't last very long. That good feel doesn't last very long. So going to an aluminum throttle tube does help that if you clean it, but an aluminum throttle tube can make your throttle feel easier. So that is important to the feel of your motorcycle, which can produce less fatigue if you're riding longer moto. So small thing, but not a big deal. ZRT, they make a great throttle. It's a bearing type aluminum throttle. And for me, that is a key thing for me. I need to have my controls and my throttle feel really nice and easy to use because I'm old and I'll get arm pump if it feels crusty and hard. Okay, so we covered the bars. I'm fine with the levers. Hydraulic clutch is great on this bike. The clutch on the KTM lasts forever. It's the best clutch there is on the market right now. I am a clutch abuser. I know clutches. I can go 30 hours. So if I can go 30 hours on a clutch on a KTM, you can probably go 60. So not a problem there. Fine with the clutch. Keeping the mantra of the chassis. Another huge thing these days are these things right here. Engine mounts. There's so many different companies designing engine mounts, saying, hey, the chassis needs an engine mount. It needs to be a little bit more flex. Not every chassis that you see, especially in the new bike era, needs an engine mount. So be forewarned, some bikes like it, some bikes don't. In this case, KTMs do like an engine mount. So for 2025, KTM redesigned their engine mount. There is more of a cutout versus a 2024 design. Overall, KTM went to a little softer of a feel in the shock tower area. They're trying to get some flex in there, which has helped some. But what REP has done, they have went to the CAD design here, and they actually, let me pull this thing out here. So where they're noticing this stock design is bolted to the muffler, right? So you have the engine mount here, and then that is directly into this bolt leading into the head pipe. So they've designed a engine mount that doesn't actually bind up this area and freeze the engine mount up, which gives you a more comfortable feel. As well as, you can see, the thickness of this is a lot different than that thickness. So they're stiffening up the mount in an area that I wasn't aware of, and it's a little bit thinner near the top. So it's just not as simple as, hey, it's a softer mount, because it isn't. It's a softer mount in an area and then a stiffer mount in an area. So the feeling that I get with these is more of a planted feel with the KTM versus these mounts. So traction is up. I will say leading into corners, the bike feels stuck to the ground more. And one other positive is just hand feel when I over jump something or slap down landings. So that is a huge improvement, and I just flipped that up. But for me, just be careful when you guys go to engine mounts to make sure they're designed right, and there is a lot of testing involved. FCP does a good job with a lot of their stuff. I know there's Works Chassis Labs. REP is now in the market with mounts. So just actually, please, if you can, read reviews, know who's advertising with certain media magazines. So if you see a lot of advertising from a certain brand, chances are maybe the review isn't 100% true. So just be forewarned there. But there are a lot of good engine mounts for different bikes, but not every bike needs an engine mount. Another thing, so chassis, once you guys do the suspension and you got some engine mounts and you got the linkage, I would say, look, you don't need anything else past that. I'm a big chassis guy. I think the engine in stock form is really good. You don't need to go any farther than that. If you guys want a little bit more excitement, a little bit more power, here are the things that I've done to this bike. What is nice about the KTM 450, unlike a Yamaha YZ450, is no matter how much modifications you do to this bike, or let's say we added a pipe and we did a Vortex ECU, sure, we're getting more power, but we're not making it unrideable or so much front side that it's hard to ride. The YZ450, I need to detune that bike. I want it more rideable. This thing still keeps that linear long feel, gets a little bit more excitement, but never is too much, or not. It's not going to rip my hands off the bars because we're building it up. So even when you do build up a KTM, it still keeps that easy to ride feel, which is amazing. So I would like a little bit more throttle response, a little bit of a cleaner feel. So what we did, we went to Jamie at Twisted Development, and he designed this exhaust flange. This just matches the head port, exhaust port, perfectly, and gives it a little bit of a cleaner feel down low and better throttle response. And for me, it just helps this bike feel a little bit lighter. If you guys ride a newer KTM, you guys know sometimes it can run a little bit dirty down low. Some of that is this stock flange where it doesn't match up to the exhaust port quite efficiently. So this is an efficient piece to put on there. Look, you're not going to get a huge gain, but you will get a cleaner running KTM, as well as a little bit more RPM response without losing traction. So that is nice. So that is one of the parts that we have in there. And look, mufflers, everyone loves a muffler. Stock muffler, there's nothing wrong with the stock muffler. It is a good piece. It sounds nice. I like the sound of it. It keeps the muffler packing integrity for a long time. But if you want a little broader feel, a smoother roll-on with a longer linear mid-range pull, the FMF 4.1 system is probably the best muffler system you can buy for a KTM. Pro Circuit makes one that makes a little bit more top end, but for me, I always like the sound and the feel of an FMF 4.1. Yes, you can just get away with a slip-on if you choose, but you're not going to get as much mid-range as you will if you do the complete system. You can come back here, Aiden. You'll see the insert that is poked in here. I keep that insert in. You can take that insert out, which most of you do, but then you run the risk of some decel popping, maybe the bike not running as clean. You will get more throttle response, a little bit more crack off the bottom coming out of corners, but you'll lose a little bit of mid-range. So for me, I keep that insert in. You can rip that insert out stock, cut the screen, stick it back in, live your life, and it's good. The downside, you need to repack this thing a lot. There's nothing as good as a Yoshimura or an Akrapovic with muffler packing. FMF, 10, 12 hours, you're gonna have to pack it. It's gonna burn up. If you don't do that in that amount of time, you risk damaging your muffler's can. So you gotta stay on top of it. If you don't wanna screw with it, Kiefer, I don't need a muffler, no problem. Skip through this video. You don't need a muffler, it's fine. But if you guys are looking for a muffler, you lose a little bit of weight, get some more mid-range, that is another piece to the puzzle for the engine. Gearing, I am still on stock gearing. I've tried messing with a lot of different gearing specs. For me, the stock gearing works well, especially what I've done to the engine, and we can lead that into the Vortex ECU. Again, nothing is wrong with the stock ECU. This is just a little bit of extra toppings on this video if you need it. I like having a very long second and third gear. I like to be lazy. I'm old. It gives me the option and the freedom to run third gear, which in stock form the KTM can't do like the Yamaha. I would like to run third gear. So Chad at XPR mapped this Vortex for this muffler, and I am running VP-T4 fuel in this bike specifically. This is what it had in it, and man, it gains about 2.5 horsepower, which probably doesn't mean crap to you or me because it's a dyno, but man, it just makes this really long, easier to ride in stock form than stock form. So that is also an expensive piece at $1,000. Again, don't need it. This is just something that we wanted to try, and it does make a quite a bit of difference, especially if you're racing, getting out of the gate, trying to beat those Yamahas next to you. Adding that piece to this KTM puzzle does help that. And to me, it's hard to beat a finely tuned aftermarket ECU that is done right by a tuner. Chad does excellent work over at XPR. Jamie at Twisted Development, he has one for this that I've tried, does excellent work. Those two guys know a Vortex ECU in and out. And for me, having the correct ECU tune makes a huge difference in the world of four-stroke technology today. So again, don't need it. You can go get the KTM tool. They have that now. That's an aftermarket piece. That actually does a lot of good as well. You can free up the engine. You download that app, you buy that piece and that little control unit, and you can dial in your engine's character. But for me, there's better parameters with a Vortex. I think you're spending anywhere between $200 to $400 on the KTM connectivity unit versus a Vortex, which is $1,000. So you guys can decide there what you want to do, but you will get more out of a Vortex versus the KTM connectivity unit. Also, with the Vortex, you get 10 different pre-programmed maps. So if you don't like one map, there's 9 others to choose from, which makes it really nice and easy to use. So another thing that KTM doesn't do well are wheels. I don't know how many times the kid behind the camera, he used to ride a KTM, we would break wheels, spokes popping out. You'd have to come in after every ride, check the spoke next to the rim lock. It was a pain in the ass. It just sucks. So what we did, factory Red Bull KTM uses DID wheels, which is new. This just came out, as well as they have their own DID rim. Yes, the new DID rim. So they call it the Ace wheels. You can see that. So they come complete. DID hub, Ace hub, and then you have the rim and then the spokes. Look, again, don't need the whole wheel if you don't want to buy it. If you guys want to go to an aftermarket heavy duty spoke to lace up on your stock wheel, that is fine as well. Again, this video is just about options for you, what works. These are the things that I have found that work. But that is a strong wheel. Another thing with wheels is you can go too strong and make your chassis feel stiffer. We don't want that out of this bike. So this is a nice blend of strength without sacrificing too much comfort. If you have, let's say, an Excel A60 rim, you know how firm your bike feels when you hit square edge or decel bumps. Man, it just makes the bike feel rigid and harsh. This doesn't do that. So be careful when you upgrade to a beefier hub or rim. It could affect your bike's handling on the track. I think that's pretty much it. So again, not a lot of bling showing on this bike. You could put graphics, seat cover on. I'm trying to do something with this bike that makes it efficient to ride, easier to ride. I'm a fan of the KTM brand. I'm a fan of the durability of the KTM. I just need more chassis feel, and so far, this chassis has created a better feel for me to go fast and have fun on a bike, because if I can't ride to my capabilities, it just isn't fun for me. I will say in stock form, this engine for me is better than a YZ450F, but you guys always say, well, why do you race a YZ450 and not choose this? Because I haven't found the right chassis feel that I need when the track gets rough. So we are trending in the right direction with, now we have a KYB front fork. Internally, we have a little bit of a broader power that I can use third gear, and for me, the chassis is getting friendlier and friendlier. Kudos to KTM for actually changing the chassis for 2025 and making it a little bit of a wider, I would say, just track toughness. If you guys don't know what that term means, it means like this bike doesn't change as much from track to track as it used to in 23 and 24. Man, that thing was just stiff feeling and rigid and just vibrated a lot. So for me, KTM changing this in 25, along with the linkage and the suspension, as well as just the handlebars and things like that, it helps dampen the bump feel, as well as it kills the vibration on this thing. If you guys are an Austrian rider and you've ridden your buddy's Japanese bikes, you will know that these things vibrate way more than other Japanese bikes, except the Kawasaki. The new Kawasaki vibrates like all hell, and the KTM is better than that. But nonetheless, that's the first thing I noticed when I hopped from my Yamaha to KTM, is how much it vibrates. So cheap mod right there. Just go to a different handlebar, and that helps that feel right away, as well as the engine mounts. The engine mounts will help dampen some of that vibration and really helps the direction of the motorcycle. So for me, that is even a good move. So again, these are just mods that work. I'm not saying you got to go buy all of these parts to make your KTM work well for you. I know some of the comments down there are going to go flip out about the suspension, but for me, if you guys are going to keep your stock suspension, at least look into springing your bike and then valving it for your weight. The AER front fork has evolved over time, has gotten better, but the consistency has not. So for me, spring fork, a little bit of money in your KTM, especially if you plan on keeping it 2 to 3 years, it's worth the investment to make your motocross days at the track a little bit more enjoyable. And I don't know, I feel like if you're spending $10,000 on a motorcycle, you have a little bit of extra money to spend on little bits and pieces to your motorcycle. Maybe I'm wrong, but for me, I feel like that's the right way. If you don't have the money, maybe you're riding a 5-6-year-old bike, and that is fine as well. But we're talking about a new bike that maybe needs a little bit of work to make it more comfortable. So stay tuned. We're going to have a whole breakdown about this bike on racerxonline.com. I did a complete garage build, maybe not as in depth as we just went into here, but you'll see the riding portion of it. You get to see how the bike looks on the track. This is just a tutorial of what you guys may need. You can also go to the RockyMountainATVMC.com Kiefer Tested Podcast, where we just bullshit about this bike, talk about it. And if you have any questions, my door is always open for you guys. Chris at KieferIncTesting.com. Hey, what else can I do to this bike? I'm happy to answer. Or maybe you don't agree with some of the things, or maybe you've tried something yourself that you want me to know about. I'm happy to listen, happy to help you out. That's why we created this whole brand right here, to help you guys out and hopefully spend your money in the right direction if you have some. Look, I get it, it's expensive. We're out in the desert. There's not a lot of money out in the desert, but we've tested a lot of time with all of our test bikes out here. We have sand, we have hard pack, we have all these rough tracks. So for me, it's a wide range scope of testing that we've brought to you guys right now, and we're happy to do it and happy to help you guys. So hopefully you guys stick around to this YouTube channel. If not, tell your buddies to subscribe, like, whatever the hell they do nowadays, but it helps us out. Thank you. We'll see you at the track.